This is a Nintendo Wii Entertainment System, and trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. While some titles could certainly squeak out 720p in resolution, most titles could barely even squeak out 480p, which was pretty bad when you compare it to the generation of the 360 and PlayStation 3. The Wii, alongside many other consoles in the generation, introduced the ability to browse the internet, and in particular YouTube. Now, using YouTube on this console was borderline torture. Loading videos with resolution so low that you'd think you'd be playing Minecraft took minutes at a time. Point being, this little block was no way efficient for watching anime. But for a lot of us kids living in the mid-2000s without our own fancy smartphones or laptops, this was really the only way to do it, with Crunchyroll and Funimation still not really being on the horizon. And I know for some of you it still is, considering my analytics say some of you watch my videos on the Wii. Kings, queens, and everything in between for the lot of you. And if many of you surmise by now, it is on this console that in 2008, I watched the greatest piece of fiction I had ever seen in my life. Many of you likely already know the story of Evangelion. Released in 1995, it features a battle between monsters called the Angels and the robots called the Evangelions, piloted by children. It quickly made a name for itself from merging these sorts of kaiju-like battles that were popular at the time with many philosophies and principles of psychology that punctuate the series. It is by far Gainax Studios' magnum opus and possibly the most influential anime ever made. Now, Evangelion was not the first mecha series that I had ever seen. At the time, I had just finished Code Geass and Gurren Lagann, so the concept really wasn't alien to me. The concepts of surrealism and philosophical media were also pretty familiar with me, and I had already been inundated with Final Fantasy and other sorts of god-killing endings, as well as Kingdom Hearts and its, well, whatever you could call a plot. Regardless, the extravagancies of what I was about to witness ought not have surprised me. But as I started watching the anime and worked my way into the end of Evangelion, there was a feeling deep inside that was really biting me, that I was now watching my favorite anime of all time. Make no mistake, when I finished watching the end of Evangelion, I was staring into the abyss, as many do, with little to no understanding of what I had just witnessed. Since that day, that minute of standing in front of the Nintendo Wii, wondering if what I had just seen was real life, I really have thought about that day. And I've thought about exactly why Evangelion became my favorite anime of all time. Because by any measure, it shouldn't have. And to explain that, I really do have to talk about the creator and director of the series, Hideki Anno. Hideki Anno was born in the town of Ube, and was known in his local high school as a growing accomplished artist, even submitting short films to the Japanese Cultural Festival. He began his career while attending the Osaka University of the Arts, becoming an animator for Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, and later working on Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. His talents were immediately recognized by the animation world at large, and he went on to become the co-founder of the now legendary studio Gainax. Gainax would go from being a prominent studio with a legendary director at its helm to a legendary studio with a god at its helm. Most know Anno previously for his work on Gunbuster, which many consider the prototype to Evangelion and Gurren Lagann, its similarities being obvious. But the series that's more relevant to this video was the one actually given to him by Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli fame, an anime known as Nadia: Secret of the Blue River. This series is a bizarre adventure steampunk camp about a pair of heroes trying to stop world domination. It's quintessential 90s goodness that I definitely suggest every anime fan give a shot. And despite how innovative and wonderful this series was, it was by every measure one of Hideki Anno's biggest failures. Anno was brought in late to the project while it had already gone woefully over budget, limping to the finish line with over 80 million yen in the hole. While the company was able to offset the losses with a video game release and other media, Hideki Anno was undeniably drained from the project, falling into a deep depression, a battle that would last the rest of his life. From here, the story is familiar to most. Hideki Anno, drinking with a executive at King's Record, agreed to begin work on Neon Genesis Evangelion, rumored to have said to himself the famous line from the beginning of Evangelion, "I mustn't run away." The series began, at least in some respect, relatively normal. A monster of the week battle between humans and angels, with Shinji Ikari being notably more distant and reserved than many of the bombacious and masculine heroes of Gundam and Battleship Yamato contemporaries. That aside, Evangelion had all of the markings of a success that blessed the series that inspired it. But things started to go wrong once again. Many in Anno's orbit began to comment that Evangelion was far too close to reality, many outright asking it appeal more to the typical Japanese otaku, looking for a cheap eye candy and fan service. On March 20th, 1995, a religious terrorist group eerily similar to that of Evangelion's antagonist Seele released a toxic nerve gas into a subway, killing 14 people. This incident radically altered Evangelion's production, slashing budgets as well as forcing Hideki Anno to change direction. Most notably, the radical changes started in the 16th episode, as Anno's interest in psychology as well as the realities of his own struggle with depression continued to deepen. This video isn't really an analysis of the infamous episode 25 and 26, and I invite you to check out Dan Olsen's wonderful interpretation of that ending. But needless to say, this is when the reality of Evangelion's meaning really began to set in. The ending was surreal, introspective, seemingly fully disconnected to the series that came prior. For 2 episodes, 40 whole minutes, Hideki Anno spoke about himself. He fully inserted himself into the character of Shinji, recounting how the world treated him in his darkest places and how he escaped. And to be honest with you, I didn't understand this for years. As many are probably aware, months of harassment, abuse, and death threats ultimately culminated in the film The End of Evangelion, which the role that Anno plays is reversed. Anno in this film chastises Shinji, who is instead of living decided that it's best if the world simply disappears into instrumentality, preventing people around him from bothering him ever again. Whereas in the original ending, the world lovingly reassured Shinji that he can live if he wills it, the message of The End of Evangelion is simply, none of you deserve it, have your giant robot fight, then go live alone in a ruined world. And well, this is the ending I originally preferred. While I originally watched the series on my Wii all those years ago, I only made it partway through episode 25 before switching over to the film. And while I was certainly weirded out by that experience, it was right then and there that I had decided that this was my favorite of all time. This is what makes the question of why Eva is my #1 anime so difficult. Oftentimes the media, whether it be books, films, anime, plays, that we end up calling our favorite, the ones that top our personal tier charts, are the ones that affect us personally the most. I remember the night that I binged through Welcome to the NHK, the 2006 dramedy about a mid-20s hikikomori shut-in forced to leave the comfort of his home and confront the world. Without spoiling, the final sequence of this last episode is one of the most powerful that I have ever seen, and one that triggered an immediate personal crisis of self-examination and reflection for me. I understood right away the meaning of NHK, personally connecting it to my own struggles of self-actualization and taking action to change my circumstances. Evangelion, though, was different. I understood the themes of isolation and the hedgehog's dilemma. I understood the meaning of allowing others to enter your own life and improving the world around you. I understood what Evangelion was trying to say, and that it was an effective measure of communicating those ideas. And the beautiful, mind-bending presentation of the actual animation is why it's my favorite. However, it has always been The End of Evangelion that defined that placement for me, until recently. As I matured and as I continued to watch, I began to appreciate those final episodes more and more. And not because they mean a whole lot personally to me, but because I understood that they meant a lot to Anno. What I've realized that truly makes Evangelion a masterpiece is how it perfectly encapsulates one man's struggle and experience. The story of robots and aliens is a vehicle to deliver this biographical message to us. And once you interpret Evangelion like this, you'll understand why Rebuild of Evangelion exists. In 2006, Hideki Anno revealed in a magazine that these films that reboot the series was his way of telling the story that he always wanted to. The first 2 films seemingly tell the same story, but The End of 2.0 demonstrated a radical departure from the original anime. The primary difference being Shinji rejecting a passive personality, instead taking the saving of Rei's life into his own hands, causing a third impact. However, I don't believe that the rebuild films are actually how Hideki Anno originally sought the series to go. Why would an anime that only exists to explain your own circumstances and your own struggles be different than the one you intend to tell? The difference is that our stories and our struggles change. We are not the same person that we were a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, 10 years ago. And Anno's story didn't stop with The End of Evangelion. For me and many others in the Eva fandom, this reality made accepting Rebuild difficult, especially going into the 3rd film. We had built this idea in our mind about what Eva was supposed to be, because we had thought that Evangelion was about us. And I still don't think I've actually reconciled myself to that fact. The story of Rebuild is still top tier in the medium, but I can't help but feel nostalgia for that original plot. While Evangelion 3+1 is billed as being the end of all Evangelion and portrayed as bringing the franchise to a close, my ongoing reflection as to why I love Eva has still not ended. And that's what makes this moment in time, August 13th, so ironic for me. While Anno has said his final goodbye with the film you're all watching today, it's really us that has yet to make that farewell. I had only just understood what episode 25 and 26 meant, and while I've seen the Rebuild films multiple times, I'm not sure I've really arrived at fully interpreting them. So really, this video's title is rather misleading. I've already seen the ending to Eva 3+1. I won't be spoiling it for you, but I will tell you, it is a real ending to Evangelion. It's a radical departure from what you've come to expect from this franchise, but in a good way. However, this ending seems to invite not just Anno, but us, to leave Evangelion behind and move on. And I think that's exactly what I have to do. I think I need to accept that I'll never truly internalize what Evangelion is supposed to mean to me, or why it's my favorite anime, or why it ought to be. I think Anno is telling us with this film that true appreciation for his work is knowing when to say farewell, when to feel happy with the experiences we've had with this series, but that we can't just dwell on the past forever. So, alongside Hideki Anno, goodbye, all of Evangelion.